All right, 717. Our question for this week actually comes not from the study from Sunday night, but instead comes from one of the Bible study groups that meets at 6. So just a reminder, there's Bible studies at 6 o'clock. We'd love to have you come to one of those. If you're coming to 717 worship, there's stuff for kids, students, adults. So just remember that. If you'd like to know more about that, you can check the website or you can ask one of us. But the question out of one of those classes is about what has historically been called the perseverance of the saints, or sometimes in Baptist circles is called the security of the believer, and is sometimes referred to even as once saved, always saved. And the question is, can a person become a Christian and then unbecome one somehow? And there are verses that sometimes tend to be very strong advocates for you could actually become a believer and then have something happen to you where you're not anymore. There are verses like the passage in Hebrews chapter 6. There are verses in 1st and 2nd Peter. Those kinds of things, occasionally you can have verses like that come up. Some of the parables Jesus told, like for instance, the parable of the 4 soils, where the seed is sown in 4 different types of soil. And sometimes there's questions about, did the person who is choked out by the weeds, the soil that's choked out by the weeds, so that person who received the word with joy and then later is choked out by the weeds, was that person a Christian who then no longer was a Christian after the weeds choked it out? Or were they a Christian and still a Christian, just living a, shall we say, a conflicted life? So there's been a lot of question here about that. And there's also verses that really support, hey, once you become a believer, you can't ever lose it. Like when Jesus says, my sheep know my voice, and I have them, and once I have them, no one can snatch them out of my hands. And then he goes on later to say, and my Father also has them, and no one can snatch them out of my Father's hands. And so those kinds of verses seem to speak to, no, once you're a believer, you can't ever lose that. Okay, so I answer this question in the following way. You cannot, on your own power, become a Christian. Only God can make a person a true believer in Him. Someone who the Spirit of God comes and lives inside them. They've been born again. They've been given a new life. They have a adoption that has taken place. They've been adopted into the family of God. They are part of the church, and the church is engaged in a very serious betrothal to the Son of God, awaiting His return. Those are all covenant relationships with God, or binding relationships with God that cannot be broken. You did not have the power to save yourself. Therefore, you don't have the power to unsave yourself. And so really the question to me is never, can a person lose their salvation? It always comes down to, were they ever really a believer to begin with? As Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. And he goes on to say, the people that are saying, Lord, Lord, are people who have been involved in religious events. They even have performed miracles. They're preaching. They're doing all these religious things. And Jesus says to them, I never knew you. Not, I once knew you, but now I've forgotten you, but I never knew you. So I think the security of the believer issue, or perseverance of the saints, or once saved, always saved, comes down to this. If you don't have the ability to save yourself, you don't have the ability to keep yourself saved, and you don't have the ability to unsave yourself. These are all works of God. And if God makes a commitment to a person in their salvation experience, when they believed in Jesus Christ, He does a supernatural work and transforms them, gives them a new heart, puts His Spirit inside them, adopts them into His family, engages them within the church to His Son as a bride. The church is the bride and the Son is the bridegroom. If He does all of those things, He's not later on going to say, I've changed my mind about you. So I feel like I'm on safe ground by saying when Jesus says, if my sheep know my voice and I have them in my hand and no one can snatch them from my hand, and that my Father has them and no one can snatch them from my Father's hands, that when someone truly becomes a believer in Jesus Christ, truly follows him with their life, not just professing, not just saying, yeah, he's my Lord, but they're not really following him with their life, but someone who really believes in him and is following him with their life, that he comes with the Spirit, he redeems them, saves them, that they can never fall out of that. And so I believe in the historical argument of the perseverance of the saints, because I think the Bible supports that. I think the basic theology of the Bible supports it, along with individual verses within the Bible support that if someone is really a believer, they will forever be within the protection of the Father's love and the love of the Son. I hope that helps. It is a hard discussion because there are a lot of verses that can be thrown back in my direction to say, well, what about this verse or what about that verse? So I have to not only point to individual verses, but the whole tenor of the Bible, along with what we know about God and what we know about ourselves, and say that I think once you are a saved person, truly believing in Jesus Christ and following him, that God keeps you in that relationship forever and ever. He will never, ever betray you. I hope that helps. Y'all have a great week.